an original MCM production.
We are ready to go forward with the formal part of our program. We have, of course, the topic of violence prevention, and we have our array of presenters and our moderator, Brother Rod Rush. And without further ado, Brother Rod.
Welcome, everyone. I guess we can all talk about the violence that's happening here in Milwaukee. However, I was unaware of the Office of Violence Prevention. There's a lot of work that this group of people do out here in our community, and I think it goes unnoticed. So today we're going to be filled with a plethora of ways to do a little bit of prevention and some alternative ways to some of the violence that's happening here in Milwaukee. I just wanted to highlight on a few things, and I'm sure they will highlight a little bit more. But there's something going on today called Heal the Hood. Most everyone has heard about that. If not, I'm sure you'll hear more as the day goes on. But the Office of Violence Prevention is also involved with youth conferences, tracking the murder rate of young black males, youth, and recognizing those who have done a little bit more, as well as their families, so they're never forgotten. Also, there's also health conferences talking about the health, a lot of health that's needed in our community, definitely in certain zip code areas where they're lacking. And there's job resources. So the Office of Violence Prevention is out there working daily. If you don't know about it today, we're going to hear a little bit more. I want to introduce our panel. We have Reggie Moore, who's the director. Reggie Moore. David Mohammed, who's the program manager. Deonte Lewis, program coordinator. Salma Abina, the analyst, is she not present? And Ms. Clark, the ReCast project manager. And Sumaiyah? Sumaiyah, okay. So I'm not quite sure who's going to go first, but I'll turn it over to the Office of Violence and Prevention. And we have Mr. Moore coming up.
All right, good morning. Give yourselves a hand for being here this morning. I want to start, first of all, with permission from an elder to speak. Okay, permission granted. And also I want to acknowledge and just ask, how many of you, by a show of hands, has lost someone that you love to violence? By a show of hands. All right. So all of us have been touched by violence in one way or another. And regardless of what side of town we live on, regardless of where we work, regardless of our race, background, or religion, this is an issue that touches everybody. For those who don't know, my name is Reggie Moore. I've been the director of the Office of Violence Prevention for 1 year, 4 months, and 6 days. I have an amazing team. This is not work that one person or even 6 people on our team can do alone. The office was actually established in 2006 by Mayor Tom Barrett with support from the Common Council, and intentionally we are placed inside of the health department. The reason for that is in the early 2000s there was a movement around the country to really look at violence as a public health issue, and that is our approach. So sometimes we think about ourselves as sort of the local CDC when it comes to this issue, and so understanding that violence is something that is transmitted from one person to another. It can be concentrated, but most importantly it can be treated and it can be prevented. Unfortunately, the only treatment that we've often had when it comes to violence in our community is law enforcement. And muscle memory, when things sort of, pop off in our community, the initial thing that we want to do or the initial thing that we say is we need more police. The police have a critical role to play in terms of investigation, in terms of accountability, in terms of, the criminal justice system. But at the same time, I think that we can all agree, and I think our elected officials understand, that a $300 million law enforcement budget is not sustainable for any community. And so as we talk about what does it mean to stop this pipeline of pain and really have a balanced approach to what public safety means that's driven by the community, that is our role to support and to raise up. The Office of Violence Prevention focuses on several different issues, including human trafficking, sexual assault prevention, domestic violence prevention. We actually staff the Commission on Domestic Violence, and I know several of our members are in the room, including Martha Love. We also focus on suicide prevention and self-harm. I think when we talk about gun violence, sometimes we're remiss to understand that suicide is one of the leading causes of gun violence in terms of the fatality of people being killed. And unfortunately, we don't talk about it enough. And also, one of the things that has also not been talked about, at least this year, is that there's been a significant increase of young women who've taken their lives in Milwaukee County, but also around the country. And so we've been having conversations with the county about that and really trying to understand what's happening and what are things that we can do to address that. And there are many different factors that are considered contributing to that, including social media, bullying, and for the young people in the room, which there are a plethora, right? This generation really is driven by social media. And despite being connected to 1,000 friends or having 1,000 followers, what we hear is that a lot of young people are lonelier than ever and feel more isolated than ever, even though they're more connected than ever. So there's something happening, and my colleague that I'm gonna bring up, Sumaiyah Clark, who runs our ReCast initiative, will talk about some of the impact of mental and social, mental and emotional health in our community, particularly as it relates to young people. From there, you'll hear from Deonte Lewis pertaining to our youth violence prevention work, and then followed by David Muhammad, who will talk about our work in the context of historical and systemic trauma in our city. And then I will come back and talk about the Blueprint for Peace. We passed out several things on the table, some things we just didn't have enough copies of. One is an overview of the Blueprint for Peace. And again, we'll get to that later, but encourage you to reference that. There's also an overview of the Office of Violence Prevention and many of the initiatives that we either fund, staff, or provide in the community. And then there's a couple of flyers that we also passed out. We will be having people throughout the weekend working on the north, south, east, and west side of the city who are doing outreach and passing out the Ceasefire Milwaukee flyers to really encourage people to not resolve their conflict with violence. The resources on the back are different places around the community that they can contact if they need conflict resolution or mediation, or are looking for resources pertaining to human trafficking, et cetera. So those are the materials that are floating around. If you did not get one personally, there are more on the back table. But at this time, I would like to bring up my colleague, Sumaiyah Clark, and she's going early because she's gonna have to leave early, but she's gonna talk about our ReCast initiative, which is basically completed its first year and going into its second.
All right, good morning, everyone. Good morning. Hey, lots of beautiful faces today. So, like Reggie said, I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about a ReCast initiative that we were funded to receive. So ReCast actually stands for Resiliency in Communities After Stress and Trauma. And at the end of last year, Milwaukee was one of 8 cities across the United States to receive funding to run this type of initiative. The overall purpose of ReCast is to assist youth and families and promote resilience and equity in communities that have faced civil unrest. And so, as you're aware, Milwaukee has experienced civil unrest in the past, from the 60s all the way until most recently with Sherman Park and Red Arrow Park incidences with Sylville Smith and Deonte Hamilton. And so, just to tell you are some of our sister cities in this project, other cities that were funded that have experienced similar things: Baltimore, San Antonio, Chicago, Flint, Minneapolis, Oakland, and St. Louis. And so some of the things that we're experiencing here in Milwaukee are not unique to Milwaukee, unfortunately, but we know that we do have to come together to improve the lives of youth and families in our communities. The overall goal of ReCast is for local communities to work together in ways that lead to improved behavioral health outcomes. But from the National Institute of Mental Health, the estimated prevalence of mental illness as of 2015 for youth between the ages of 10 to 24 is, I'll break it down into 3 different categories. So oftentimes we go into the grocery store and you may have a kid stand behind you and they smell like what? Marijuana, right? So we may say, so with current substance abuse, about 8% of the kids are estimated to be experiencing some sort of substance abuse illness. And with that makes up almost 6,000 kids in the city of Milwaukee, which is pretty significant. If we think about mental illness, any type of mental illness in the last year, and again, this is for youth between the ages of 10 and 24, that's about 18%, which is about 26,700 youth. And then if we were to say current mental illness that is debilitating, like I can't get up in the morning, it's impacting my ability to concentrate in school, maybe I'm having some other types of challenging behaviors in the community, that's between 4 and 7, that is about 8% of youth, and which is about 12,000 kids. So it is a very significant issue in the city of Milwaukee. The beautiful thing about the ReCast project, how many of us have heard the term nothing about us without us? So that is a concept saying that if we are going to build something, if we're going to build the foundation of this work, then we have to have community involvement in order to figure out what the process is. What do our communities need? What do the families and the children need? How do they define hope and healing in the community? Where are they going in the community? Who do they consider to be providers of hope and healing in the community? So whether that would be with someone in their school or out of school time programs, or whether that would be a church group that they have, really starting to look and honor those places and make sure that they're coordinated to the larger systems as well. So with the county services and the services that are provided through the city, that's one of the major goals with this project. And then what I'll do is I'll just tell you 5 of our aims. So with ReCast, like I said, the purpose is to assist the youth and families and increase individual resiliency, but also community resiliency, because we know that when a lot of individuals are hurting, that also can impact our community. And so the 5 aims of ReCast are to build a foundation to promote well-being, resiliency, and community healing through community-based participatory approaches. So that's a fancy way of just saying that the community needs to be involved throughout the whole process, whether that's just, going out, raising awareness in the community, all the way to, doing projects or collecting data and then analyzing it and then reporting it back and coming up with an action plan. They need to be involved in every single step. The next goal is to create more equitable access to trauma-informed community behavioral health resources. So when we're thinking about equitable access, that could be looking at barriers for people to be insured so that they can actually go to the service provider. That could be looking at where the service providers are located and making sure that there's accessible transportation for them to get there. So there's a lot of different things that could occur there. The third aim is to strengthen the integration of behavioral health services. Now, this is what I was speaking about, looking at the non-traditional providers, so the churches and the grassroots organizations, and making sure that they're coordinating with the larger organizations or the systemic providers. And then even with those larger systems, looking at the gaps in the services and then coming and saying, okay, we understand that this is your process, but these are some gaps, and then here's what we believe to be some recommendations that might better meet the needs of the youth and families in our communities. The fourth one is to create community change through the community-based approaches that promote youth engagement, leadership development, improved governance, and capacity building. And so if any of us have ever been a part of a program where, like, this is a really awesome program, it's here for 2 years, and then it disappears, right? And then you're like, well, we still have this group of people who need these services and support. Well, one of the major things with this project is to really look at the needs of the different entities and see how we can build an infrastructure to create sustainability and build the capacity so that they can last for the long term. And then the last goal is to ensure that the program services are culturally relevant and developmentally appropriate. So if we're going and we're working with Black and brown youth, then we need to make sure that whatever services or interventions that are happening with them actually meet their needs, and we're including them in the process of defining what that needs to look like. And so I will, at this point, I guess I will let Deonte speak, and then we'll be open for questions and things afterwards. But thank you very much for your time.
Just want to pause 1 second. I know there's a wealth of information that we're getting here, but hopefully everyone had enjoyed their breakfast this morning. Good, good. Shortly, we'll have a basket coming around just for donations to help offset the cost of this. Without further ado, we'll have Mr. Lewis come on up. We wanted to get that in.
How y'all doing today? How y'all doing today? All right, the reason why I said it the second time is because so many times we overvalue life, right? A lot of our young people don't want to live old. They don't want to get old because nobody tells them that they should live old. Nobody makes it cool to be old. And when I say old, seasoned, not old. All right. So I'm Deonte Lewis, working with the Office of Violence Prevention, but more so, I grew up on 16th and Center. Now, I vividly remember the newspaper, our newspaper, the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, put a black box around my neighborhood, and it said, no black boy will make it out by the age of 18 and 21. Know what the issue is? The issue is I truly believed it, because I'd have seen peers that had dropped and fell away, right? Like, I've lived through that. I live with the fact of having to get shot at, right? I live with the fact that I lost 18 people that were close to me by the age of 21. So when I come up here to speak to you, it's not from a title, it's not from a job or anything like this. Like, violence chose me, but I'm choosing to prevent it. So that's the reason why I stand in front of you. Now, when he asked the question about young people or anybody in the room that have lost someone due to violence, and there were a few people that actually said that they lost someone. But it's interesting when we go into schools and classrooms and we ask that question, everybody double up. And then we have to follow up with another question, how many people lost more than one person? Everybody double up. You ask how many people has lost more than 3 people? Everybody double up. You ask somebody who lost 5 people, they double up. And these are young people that are about the ages of 14 to 18. So a lot of the times we see these young people, and I fallen guilty to this as well. You'll see a young person while you're out late at night or whatnot, and then immediately you feel as if you have to protect yourself, as if there's some suspect automatically, like they're guilty, right? Like whatever it is that they want to do, you feel like they're going to do something to you. And the reality is that's what society is creating. So if you come out as a young person, you come out as an individual that they believe everyone, including us in the community, some of us in the room, some of us that work with these young people, we automatically assume that they're going to be trouble because of what they look like, because of what somebody told us, and because of this whole social engineering that they have that's dictating to label these young people as monsters. So, with the Office of Violence Prevention, the work that we're doing, recently we just completed this summer. I had a group of 7 interns, and we created a Beyond the Bell app. And this app was essentially something that was created. It started about 3-4 years ago. Just the overall Beyond the Bell organization, but we created an app, or helped revitalize an app, and this app would allow a young person, regardless of where you are, it was connected with Google and everything, so it'll tell you exactly how far away your nearest art place is, how far away your food pantries are, how far away of any youth server organization whatsoever. Because one thing that we're realizing is the fact that the phone really controls their life, right? And we're getting so, to my brother's point earlier, we're so social media heavy, but they don't have real relationships. Everything is about social media, right? So it's like really you being social for entertainment purposes only, rather than building relationships. And mainly, most of the reason why we're not building those relationships is because it's something that we haven't seen. And I'm not sure who listens to this, but like Loyalty by Kendrick Lamar, right? Like what you have in your DNA, right? And a lot of these young people truly don't believe that that's in there. And the reason they don't believe that is for many reasons, right? So in addition to that, the app, we've been doing some ride-alongs. So thank you to Milwaukee Police Department, the Office of Community Outreach and Education. We've been able to go into households to really have conversations with young people about auto theft and things like that, but more so to figure out what is at the core of this happening. So many times we will look at these young people and they see, I mean, any mugshot, unless you're on there smiling, you're going to look like you're mad, because not many people want to be where you are when you're taking that mugshot. So the assumption is that these young peoples are savages. These young peoples are, like, there's a mold, right? Like if you got dreads, you're likely to commit a crime. You know, like that's a lie. But the reality is a lot of these young people that we've gone in households, some of them have 2 parents, right? Some of them have 1 parent. Some of them live in houses that they own. Some of them live in apartments that they may get evicted next week. The whole span is broad. So I want us in this room to make sure that when we're out there speaking to this, when we're speaking of these young people that are engaged in these crimes, let's understand like what's at the core and don't make assumptions of what actually looks like as a blanketed approach. So out of the 16 young people that I've worked with, I've gone into some houses where the parents were supportive, and then I've come in some houses where the parents were like, hey, these are throwaway kids. Only reason why I'm in here is because I'm getting money off of them, right? So in that scope, if you look at it through your lens, right, add in the fact that somebody put you on Ritalin when you were young, add in the chemical imbalance that exists in your life, add in the fact that society doesn't accept you, add in the fact that the Constitution don't say that you're a human, add in to all of these different elements, and then we say that they crazy. Nah, I think we crazy if we're not the ones that's investing into them and making sure that they have the necessary things in order for them to get to where they want to get. So when I go and talk to the young people, sometimes it's 11 o'clock at night, sometimes it's 1 o'clock at night, sometimes it's when their mom went experience the fact that they have a gun on them and they're about to go commit something. They'll give me a call and say, hey, I need you to come over here and talk to them. And no, I don't carry a gun with me when I go into his household. I carry love with me, and I believe that the God that's inside of me be able to pour into the God inside of them. And once we realize that, bullets don't even matter anything, because the bullets in the mind are far worse than any bullets in any gun. And we have to understand that it takes courage. And we come from a courageous people. Before we had all of this, like the police, this budget, it's crazy. Before we had that grandmother on our block. So when we talk about 16th and Center, we talk about Miss May, right? So Miss May, this is how Miss May worked. Miss May, I love her, but she got me a lot of whoopings, right? And Miss May, we would be on 16th, and we used to do different things because we were baby kids. But we used to ride our bike, and we used to go through the cemetery right over here on Tatonia, right? We used to ride our bike through the cemetery at night, but it was like the coolest thing because it's like you may trip up, you may stumble, and then you be amongst the tombstones, right? Don't judge us. That was our fun. But we did that, and in doing that, when we grew up, the street lights had to be on before you had to be at home before the street lights came on, right? Well, the only time that it was fun was at night. So, you know, when you think that you beat your mom, you beat your parents or whatnot, we were riding our bike, and it's about 16 of us. And I'm the youngest. I'm probably like 10 years old. And I think I was sneaking in through the back door. My uncle and my aunt was with me. And my aunt didn't get a whooping, so I really feel as if, and we didn't have cell phones back then, I really feel like she got in the house first and told on us that we were coming, and they were prepared. So we in the house, we sneaking in the house, and I'm the last person to come up because I'm like, I'm jumping for joy. I'm playing with the dog that we had in the yard. And then there's Miss May. Now, Miss May probably like 65 years old. She's retired. I'm like, why are you up? So Miss May says, so my formal name is Deonte, but she says, Bucky, what you doing out there? You know that moment where you're about to like let go on yourself? You're like, whoa, you caught. She said, Bucky, what you do? Now you know. She called everybody that was in the house. So it was 4 families in this one house. She called my grandmother down to my aunt, and then she was like, and you know, your mama don't play. And that's all it took for me to get in the house, and I ran in the house, and I didn't leave the house. It was like a Friday night. I didn't leave the house until like Sunday morning because I was so afraid of what was going to happen if I would have been out, and I wanted to get caught up in the night. So saying that, like so many times we look for external releases, external solutions. We point to somebody else to do something. We talk about how many grants can we get. We talk about MPD. We talk about the troublemakers on the block. We talk about all of these individuals that we never engage, but we always be at a point. And the reason why we point is the fact that pointing doesn't come with a responsibility, right? But if we turn that back in here and be like, hey, what can I do to stop this? That's when, if everybody in this room was to go out there right now, we got this garden going on right now in this area. I'm not sure if you guys pulled in, but if you pulled in and saw them walking, like, let's donate to that, and there will be opportunities to do that. And you can do that basically remotely off your phone. So we got this MKE. Say that one time. I just need energy. We got this MKE. We got this MKE. Okay, cool. Thank you. Yeah, indeed. So And I just got put onto the board there, so I'm definitely going to continue to support. So we may have to say it a couple more times before we leave. But so we figure out what is it that we can do, and the lone thing that we can do is really get back to the core, get back to the roots. Because for a lot of you in this room, some of you may have grandsons, granddaughters that we've been displaced and haven't talked to because we haven't gotten along with the mom. But for the majority of the young people that I've dealt with, the biggest cause is not poverty. It's not the fact that they don't have a job. It's not the fact that their mama having a tax time boyfriend and they don't have any consistency in their life. It's not because they don't have a mentor. The biggest issue is that the grandmother is no longer there. And what the alarming thing with that is the fact that it just shows you that love cures and conquers all. And the purest love that a lot of these young people had came from their grandmother, came from their great-grandmother, came from individuals that gave them that undeniable love. And it wasn't about the money. It wasn't about them taking them shopping. It may have just been that sugar bread that they made them that morning. Or it may have been that hug, right? That sweet potato. Oh, yeah. My granny used to make some bomb rice pudding. But it was through that they saw love, they felt love. So when we in here, like even for myself, like I still have to deal with the fact that I come from where I come from on a daily basis. And the fact that I don't see many people that come from where I come from that really got off of their porch and really played in the neighborhood that they lived in, that really had to deal with getting shot at, really had to deal with the fact that my dad was killed when I was 13, really having to deal with all of these different elements. Like even still to this day, that there's a lot of people that look at me when they see me coming like yeah, what you up to, man? Like, how you doing? You know, like, but the reality is like that's what these young people are dealing with. And the fact that I've been able to mature myself, surround myself with a necessary support system and be able to get to where I wanted to get to has helped me and guide me to be able to pour back into the lives of these young people. And I encourage all of you to do the same. So when we look at this office may consist of 6 people. But at the end of the day, like this is about y'all. This is about a community. Everything that we do is about y'all. Everything that we do, it should be informed by you guys. So you see the plan around there. If you have thoughts, if you don't like the wording of the plan, please let us know, because we're not an individual or a group of people that really believe like we have all of the answers, because we don't. It takes a collective effort, and it takes everybody, whether you own your house and you just doing your garden. Just saying hi to that young person might say that young person's life may prevent that young person from stealing a car. But if you ignore that young person like he isn't there, gun, now I'm God. So if ain't nobody paid attention to me, I'm God. And I got bullets to release. I can take life and I can give life. So it's not the fact that they're crazy, it's the fact that they misunderstood. And not a lot of people have decided to invest in them. So I encourage everybody to invest in the lives of these young people, because I was one of those young persons. And at 13 years old, I could have went one way or the other. And honestly, the streets probably would have been an easier track because I was more familiar with that road. But I chose to blaze this trail, and there's going to be a lot of young people that follow up behind me. So I encourage everyone to make sure that we do our part and stop pointing the finger. Let's start to point it back in towards us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. I think we all can echo on that about how grandmother helped us out in our lives. And we don't have a lot of grandmothers out there today doing some of the things that were done. I know Miss May must be a big part of Deonte Lewis's life. So hopefully some other youth can have that same feeling. For further ado, we're going to have the program manager come up, I believe. Brother Muhammad, he's going to give us a lot of information about things that are happening and how the Office of Violence Prevention is handling it. Thank you.
Good morning. Morning. I always start customarily. I give honor to my Creator, and I always give honor to the elders. And when I come before people, I always say peace, because peace is something that is elusive with so much war and killing that's going on. And when I always do presentations, I always want to recognize the fact that most of us in this room are descendants of a stolen people on stolen land. And when we talk about violence, we tend to follow the media narrative as though it focuses solely on human choices and human behavior that is individual and not systemic and not produced by beliefs and actions. So I want to talk a little bit about that. So I feel like this is a good space for that in my brief remarks. I want to also acknowledge my elder, my brother Ruben Harpo here, who, when we talk about elders and we talk about people who have been doing this work for a long time, this is a brother who, when he started talking about rites of passage for young black boys, people mocked it and called it voodoo, as though we didn't have a right to have history. And so I think it's important to acknowledge that this is work that stands on shoulders. This is work that stands on the shoulders of people like Janetta Robinson, and career youth development, and many of our organizations that have come and gone because the care that we offer our community is such that it is unapologetic. And when you're unapologetic about caring about your community and caring about your people, it will shake the apple cart of other people who would just do a mediocre job and just go along to get along. So it's appropriate that we mention names like that in this work. We talk about the commandos who lay a foundation for the type of response. Think about how many cities where you have a history of the NAACP, but you don't have a militant street outreach component to the NAACP. But you got that here in Milwaukee with Father Grappi as we come up on the 50th anniversary. And so I want to go quickly because I don't have a lot of time, but for the Office of Violence Prevention, there's 3 levels of violence. And for most people, their concept of violence is the most visual one that they see on the news, which is the 3rd tier, which is the lowest level. So I want to go through the top tier first and point to what we're talking about. The 3 causes of violence that we address with the Office of Violence Prevention. Number 1 is structural violence. Structural violence is economic decline and joblessness. It's racial and economic segregation. It's poor school quality. It's declining police legitimacy. Concentrated growth of single-parent families. Income inequality. The most violent thing is not a gun. The most violent thing is public policy. And it's public policy manipulated because of a fear that racial equity will lead to competition and that some people will just have to learn what all of us learned in a sandbox when we were children, which is that we have to actually share and share with equity. The second level of, the second level of violence that is most egregious that many of us encounter is developmental, which is, as a young person, early juvenile offense, substance abuse problems or exposure to substance abuse in the home, exposure to domestic violence at an early age, which is really at the root of a lot of this. Delinquent peers, because the culture of our social network is much stronger than the culture in the home. And a prior history of violence, meaning that we've used it in the past, and so it becomes, as we talk about muscle memory, it becomes the go-to of, the common denominator or the least resort. That's where we go to first because we don't know how to handle it any other way. So when you look at the statistics about homicides and you see argument, fight as the list, it's because somebody reached for a weapon because they didn't have access to a solution on the front end before the problem even began. The last, and this is the one that everybody sees on Facebook, this is the one that everybody sees on the news, this is situational violence that leads to personal acts of injury or harm to another person, most often somebody closest to them. So you hear people talk about black on black violence. People tend to hurt the people they're closest to, and the people they're closest to tend to look like them. That's just human nature, all right? However, the types of violence that we see are definitely impacted by public policy and social conditions. I'll give you a quick example. The number 1 homicide victims and victims of non-fatal shootings in our city are young black men 16 to 25. They also are the perpetrators. There's some caveats to that as well. And so for people who are coming home from the prison system and there's low opportunity for them in the community, you sometimes see turf battles over what they're trying to reestablish because of the environment that they left is what they're returning to because they didn't develop any new skills that they could use in the world that they now are in. You can get a job in prison, but there's 50 jobs you can't get out of prison, okay? And so you have a high level of gun violence in that age group. But interestingly, among Hispanic females and Hispanic males, the violence skews older, from their 50s to their early 60s. And we see a lot of that with relationship to domestic violence and to situational incidents of violence, people leaving taverns and whatnot on the South Side. So violence can take different forms in different communities, but it all is reflective of the certain dynamics of that community depending on lack of opportunity and concentrated poverty. So situational violence, ongoing disputes among groups including social media. In 2017, social media is a place, okay? It is not just your phone. When you are sitting at the table with your grandbabies and they constantly, their neck is at a 45-degree angle, all right? They are actually somewhere else. And they are in a place interacting with other people, okay? And if we don't cross that bridge to learn how to utilize it ourselves, we will be left out of that place and not know how to get there. Number 2 of the situational incidents of violence, semi-random disputes amongst individual actors. Semi-random, what does that mean? So-and-so looked at me in traffic and cut me off. He drove on the shoulder and swerved in front of me. So now I'm gonna show him I have my concealed carry permit, but I won't show him the permit. I'll show him the gun that I'm concealing and carrying now that I'm waving out of the window, okay? That's the type of situation that's semi-random. So-and-so said something to me, scuffs my sneaker, said something on Facebook, now I'm gonna find where he lives. A retaliatory response to a prior violent act. So now we're talking about situations where somebody did something, so now I'm gonna do something back, and it's gonna be ongoing because we're disengaged from the society and we are living outside of the, accepted economy. Let's put it like that. Or number 4, and that takes us on the last point I just made, a drug or robbery dispute. We put forward that none of this happens in a vacuum. In 2015, that was one of the highest spikes of violence that took place in Milwaukee. There were 145 lives lost. That is a staggering number for a city of this size. However, the more staggering number is the 633 people that were shot non-fatally. So we know what happened to the person that was murdered. However, what happens to the person that has a wound now and a scar that is physical, emotional, and spiritual? What happens to a community that's traumatized? So when we heard Sumaiyah talk about ReCast, ReCast is literally that, it's recasting a system, not so that we can go and further experience trauma by engaging with a system that doesn't treat us with equity, but it means acknowledging those informal networks and systems that we already have in our community and lifting them up, because really that's the modern base of support that we look to. And it is exactly as Deonte said when he talked about, what you call her? Big Mama? Miss May? Okay, well, Miss May, you could go from one side of the block to the other side of the block, and then if you did something at the one end, you heard about it at the next end. That's a sign of social cohesion that is gone because of a lack of institutions in our neighborhoods. I'm talking to an audience that can remember Bronzeville, that can remember other economic districts of the city, that can remember in the late 60s, early 70s, before 43 North was built in and cut all up and down the city. We just were in Minneapolis, and we were talking with some of the city leaders there, and they described how the highways were built in Minneapolis, and that the Catholic community, white people, got together and said, our parishes are here. So the head of the Catholic Church in that city went to the city leaders and said, you're not going to build your highway through our parishes. So since they were organized, the highway did not go through their community. But it was easy to pick apart the black community because of the lack of social cohesion. So now you had a highway that got built right up through it. This is not an aberration. This is the latest effect of violence that people of color have experienced in this country. I want to read something briefly. Anyone who studies social science should know about Daniel Patrick Moynihan's Moynihan Report. They can think what they want about it, but it was a very truth-telling document, which is hard to get inside of government entities sometimes. And so that's really what we're trying to produce with the Office of Violence Prevention. But look at this quote from him. For this, most of all, white America must accept responsibility for black family breakdown. Flows from centuries of oppression and persecution of the Negro man. It flows from the long years of degradation and discrimination which have attacked his dignity and assaulted his ability to produce for his family. Now, there's a lot of gender dynamics at play that a lot of people may take issue with, but if you study the history, and I want to move a little quicker so I can have, my brother come up here. The matriarchal structure of the black community is a byproduct, in many respects, of social policy in America. I'm not talking about pre-enslavement. I'm talking about in America. And we can go all the way through the history. We talk about human trafficking. Exhibit A is the fact that we're here for the way that this system feeds off of black bodies and black life. All right? And the abuse of people, an entire people, is something that if you hear anything about the term epigenetics, epigenetics is the effect on the DNA of a people through generations, and how the trauma that their ancestors experienced lives on in them in the way that they manifest fight or flight. It actually inhibits the way that they respond in certain circumstances that re-trigger a historical trauma. Our Native American brothers and sisters study this, and they're doing a lot of work on this. It's something that people should really give eye to. In the Jim Crow South, when you go from de jure to de facto slavery, de jure meaning by law, de facto meaning by practice, because just because Juneteenth happened and we got the letter in Texas that we were free, didn't mean that the attitudes changed. And so you can go through black advancement and find that we were able to establish 60 towns that were taken away from us by either law or by racist terrorism in this country. So when people wonder why we're not making the advancement in some of our communities, it's because we had broke legs to begin with, so we couldn't run the race. And many of us and our ancestors, and I speak us and our because this is the community that we are in. This is a community I'm a part of as a person of African descent, but bigger than that, this is Milwaukee. Milwaukee is a majority minority city. And while violence is not just a black issue, the experience of Milwaukee is very much defined by these interactions in how violence manifests itself. That's how you can get to the point where the #1 victims of homicides and gunshots are young black men. And that's how you can get to the incarceration rates we have as well, that we send over 5,000 black men out of the city of Milwaukee into the state prisons. Now, that didn't start in a vacuum. That started as a manner of social policy. But it is one that I believe really took a high form in the last 40 years. Because while we were pushing for equality, while you could have reports like the Moynihan Report, and government can get reports and look at them and see what level of investment is needed to help lift the community out of pain and suffering, the political will has to also be there, and the push has to be there, as well as the eyes have to be there to make sure that the tax dollars go where it is most needed to lift up the condition of the least, because when you lift up the condition of the least, you improve the condition of all, because this is a shared space, okay? So when you look at how poverty and violence has been addressed in the past, it is exactly as Sumaiyah said earlier. We were not at the table, we were on the table. We were the topic of discussion, and that's why you can have so many studies and so many reports, and you can have all this data that none of the community knows about. You can have all these heat maps about everything that's going on in our community, and none of us ever see it. Where if we saw it, we might be able to, hey, I know who lives there. I know who's staying there. I know what I can do to reach this one and that one. That is the that's the essence of this type of work. It's identifying and treating people for their humanity and dignity rather than criminalizing an entire community. Violence is symptomatic of greater crime, and that is the crime of neglect, and that is the crime of the social engineering that denies certain communities access to resources and power. How does this affect young people? Because we can hear about crime. How many have heard the term Chirac? All right, okay, some of us. All right, they say, you've heard that Chicago is the most violent city in America, and we gotta do something about Chicago. We heard 45, we heard our president say that, didn't we? Okay, well, I can name 3 cities based upon their population and homicide rates that are more violent than Chicago. But if you didn't know better, you would think Chicago was Afghanistan. Because, you know, to a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. And so when you look at the community and you look at this generation of young people, they are very different than the generation that I'm speaking to majority in this room right now. This is a generation that is always on 10, as we say. They are always in a state of hypervigilance and hyper-arousal because of exposure to violence, but also because of the disruption of family life. We can't have a conversation about violence and pretend that the crack bomb didn't drop in 1985. You know about the crack bomb, right? It's what disrupted that generational link between Big Mama and the young person. It's why grandma is so important, because grandma had to become the primary caretaker while somebody else got strung out and someone else got arrested. And so now you have a generation of young people who cannot respect elders because they've sold dope to elders, all right? Because they've sold dope to family members, because they've seen family members torn apart and taken out of the community. We don't have the ability to show it, but if I was able to show you a map of 53206 right now, you would think every dot was a house. But every dot on the map is not a house. It's a person who's been to prison in every house, or someone who's been in the criminal justice system. What does that do to the family dynamic of young men and women who are growing up in that community, as well as the elders of that community? And so the generation of young people that we're dealing with now experience trauma. It is not post-traumatic, it's present traumatic. It's persistent traumatic. It is trauma as both a victim and a perpetrator, because it is true, and I know it's cliche, but hurt people do hurt people. And so you're looking at a generation of young people who, because of the breakdown of institutions in community and family life, they look to institutions for support rather than looking to the people in their own community. And so the social worker, the after-school program, the nonprofit leader takes the place of the traditional family role, and so they're always looking out rather than looking in. And when they get involved with the system, many of them, if you offer them some type of help, they'll freak out. They'll quit the job after 2 weeks because, and if you ask them, why'd you quit the job? They'll say, well, somebody talked crazy to me. I ain't like the way they talked to me, so I walked off. You say, but boy, I called everybody, I did everything. And so just like the generation that we're living with now doesn't want to respect the elders that they looked at as, you know, drug addicts, they don't respect the assimilationist politics and beliefs of another generation that did never accomplish the justice and equity that they felt like they deserved at having a seat at the table, not as an inferior, but as an equal. And so this generational disconnect has made it very difficult for us to deal with the violence. So I want to just talk on my last point. I just want to show y'all this flyer. We got a couple people in the community here. My brother Khalil in the back, my brother Keon. While we plan, while we strategize, while we work to help influence and make sure that resources can meet those most in need, can I say it? We got 40 people on the street right now this weekend passing this flyer out. It says, stop shooting, start living. It has the 6 goals, and we try not to use jargon because we want the goals of the blueprint plan to be accessible to everybody in the community. The 6 goals of the blueprint are on the front. On the back, are some basic resources. It's not an exhaustive list. The list that's on the back is basic resources to guide people and direct people to. While that's not the solution to the problem altogether, many people don't feel the agency or the efficacy or the confidence to go and seek help, and most of us don't know where to send them anyways. But the help that we really need to get people is the help that we can give each other. When we were talking to the group of people last night who are out in the field this weekend, we said this is just it's a plugger. This is just an invitation to a conversation. The real message is you, the person that has overcome violence. I got a phone call from one of the people yesterday. He said, well, does my criminal history preclude me from doing this? Because I ain't on that no more. I said, no, brother. It actually enhances your ability to do this. Because you know what you've been through, and you know how you overcame it, and you know how you're staying away from those evils that could pull you back to it. And because you've been able to do it, you can go and reach somebody else who's in it without falling victim to that environment. See, I believe in that. And social policy doesn't always believe in redemption. In fact, it believes in condemnation and collective punishment. But we believe in redemption. And I believe that our people are redeemable, and that the people who are suffering in this city can have an opportunity to make a difference where they live to stop the violence they see, whether it's systemic, whether it's developmental, or whether it's situational. They have a voice in this process. So we thank you for your time, and we welcome your questions.
Okay, we still have a lot of more information coming up. But again, Brother Muhammad gave us a wealth of things that are happening and the initiatives and goals of the Office in Prevention. So I'm sure with this audience here, who was raised with Miss Mays in their life, can also help out these youth. But we're going to have a little bit more statistical data from Mr. Moore.
Don't run out the room. Correction, no more stats. What I want to cover really quick is the actual overview of the blueprint. So again, if you don't have a copy, there might be extra ones on the table, but we encourage you to share. And so just a little bit of background on this process, because we actually want your feedback to it. And I'm going to be extremely brief. This process started in November of 2016. And we've engaged the community in this process with a sense of urgency, but also with a sense of intention. And we understand the critique and pressure of saying, why does it take so long to develop a plan? Okay, this has only been 9 months, and we understand, just based on also on the information that we heard, that this issue has been centuries in the making. And so for the community, over 1,000 young people who've given input to this plan, and over 5,000 adults in this community who've been involved in contributing to it, this is the best thinking locally, informed by national best practice and research of what we should be doing to address the issues that you've heard about today. And so the way this overview is laid out, and the plan right now is 90 pages. So we obviously wanted to, 1, save trees, and 2, just give you what we would consider the DNA of the plan. A lot of the other document is sort of context, it's a lot of maps, it's a lot of data, it's a lot of background on all of the strategies in here. But just to walk you through really quick, the vision for the Blueprint for Peace is that Milwaukee is a safe and resilient city where the lives of all residents are valued, promoted, and protected. The risk and resilience factors that you see here are actually selected by members of the community. They had a longer list to pick from in terms of risk factors, which are factors that contribute to violence, and resilience, i.e. protective factors that reduces someone's likelihood of becoming victimized or perpetrator of violence. And so as you can see here, these were the ones that were ranked as the highest drivers of violence in Milwaukee, and the most, and what we need to be doing in terms of increasing protective factors to reduce the likelihood of violence. There are 6 goals and 29 strategies identified in the blueprint at this point. There is a steering committee which has broad representation of young people, mothers who've lost their children to gun violence, representatives of the police chief, the mayor's office, Children's Hospital, the medical college, President Ashanti Hamilton. It runs the gamut in terms of the steering committee. However, their charge isn't to write the plan. Their charge was to ensure that community voice and engagement was what drove this document. However, we wanted to have people on the steering committee who will can be held accountable for ensuring that what is listed in this blueprint actually gets implemented. But it will not get implemented without all of you. And to be clear, this is not a list of things that just the Office of Violence Prevention will do. This is what the community has said works, or that they would like to see more of, or in other cases, there are things that are listed here that we have not tried as a community that we're about to embark on. So with that being said, the 6 goals that as they are listed on the flyer as well, number 1, and they're not necessarily in any hierarchical order, but stop the shooting, stop the violence, promote healing and restorative justice, support children, youth, and families, promote economic opportunity, foster safe and strong neighborhoods, and strengthen the capacity and coordination of violence prevention efforts. Unfortunately, aside from law enforcement, if you ask around, no one raises their hand and says, hold me accountable for public safety. We do hold our elected officials accountable for it. We hold law enforcement and courts accountable for it. But as Brother David said, this is something that we have to be accountable for, and that we actually have the greatest power to decrease. And so with that being said, and we can't do that alone without the resources and without the policies to back that up. And so what we want to encourage you to do as we transition to Q&A is we passed out a couple of markers on each table as well as a few Post-it notes. As you review this and throughout the Q&A session, if you can write down from this blueprint, what are some of the things that you would hold as the highest priority? That in terms of if we could only do 3 things in this blueprint, what for you sticks out or resonates with you as a top priority in the blueprint? And then the last thing I want to say about the blueprint is it's designed to really be a 5-year strategy, and to also understand that it is a blueprint, okay? A blueprint basically describes what will the building or what should the building look like. Everybody in this room are electricians, are plumbers, you're the technicians that are actually doing the work. Our role as the general contractor is to make sure that we have the materials, the resources, and everything needed to actually build the reality that we want to see in this city. And so we want you to hold us accountable for that and understand that our commitment to you is to that. So with that being said, I'll end here so that we can jump into Q&A, and then also encourage you both in your commentary, if you have feedback about anything that you heard, anything that we should be doing, anything that you would like to see stop happening in the community, we want to hear that. But then also, if you could write down on the Post-it notes your priorities for this blueprint. And if there's anything that you see missing, to also write that as well. Thank you.
So, got a little work to do. I'm sure the Office of Violence Prevention would appreciate you reviewing that document and then putting down some suggestions so we can further our conversation before we get out of here today. But right now, we're going to start the question and answer session. And again, this is the time for you to just ask one question to the panel, and they'll get a response to you. Not promote your things that are going on. You form a line to my right, your left. You first? All right. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Ms. Rose, and I looked over your overview, and I see something missing in there that maybe because it's government-oriented, and that deals with education of self-awareness of from whence one comes from, so that one can teach the social skills needed for interaction, which brings me to the establishment of a grandparent or great-grandparent section that is missing from here. You want the community involved, but there's no place in here for people like me who would be able to talk to young people about the skills that are needed so that we get out of the guttural place of mentality to move up to a better class of interaction for principles and morals.
Would you like to respond? Any comments? Okay. All right. Next. Thank you.
I've been working in an area where there is money, but I think the money is not being used appropriately. And that's treating people who have addictions and behavioral health problems at the same time. It's not being done. I've been at budget meetings. I was at the City Disability Commission meeting. It must be done. That revolving door has got to stop. We're treating people with behavioral health problems by giving them prescriptions. They're taking drugs. At the same time, they have an addiction. And that's one of the areas is we don't have a dual certification program for social workers. I've been working with 2 social workers who have been giving me a lot of information in this area. And they pointed out that about 20% of the social workers have gone out and gotten a dual education, dual certification. In one case, firsthand, where the person died, 31-year-old died, his social worker did not know what ADHD was. His social worker was giving him instructions on the phone and verbal instructions when they met. You can't do that with somebody with ADHD, especially if it's severe ADHD. This got to change. This has to change. So the money's there. We're actually wasting money. We're treating people in one area for addiction and for their behavioral health problem in another area, but not together. So we have over $40 million now that's been appropriated by the state to treat addiction. Because of the fuss I've been making about the lack of peer group homes, they put me on a committee to come up with recommendations for more group homes. The day before the first conference call, they took me off the committee because I said, I'm not going to do this unless you talk about both problems together. And if we do get to build new group homes and the existing group homes, they must have both disciplines being handled at the same time. Thank you.
Okay, remember, this is a question and answer session. A question. A question.
I'm going to try to keep it to that. My question is, how can I be used? That is my question. I turned 50 years old this year. I grew up in all those eras, Big Mama, Auntie on the Block. I grew up when the crack bomb dropped in the neighborhoods, and I started out as a drug dealer. And then I turned into the drug addict, and then I turned into the individual who couldn't keep a job because of my addiction, and then gave almost 16 years of my life to the Illinois prison system, and then came out when God really knew that I was ready to handle what he was going to give me and to get me cleaned up. And I came out here, got married, found a job. I was facing $120,000 worth of child support. Within 2 years, because of God, that child support is gone. I'm able to get my car, the liens off of my car, get the liens off of my property, able to get a passport, successfully working a job for the last 5 years that I've only been out of the prison system for about 5 years. So my question is, where can a person like myself fit in? Because I've been up here before. I've talked to Judge Cynthia Davis. I've talked to a few other people, and I've said this story before. And for some reason or another, I'm the perfect individual that can be used to speak to some of those people. So that's my question.
Let's commend you, brother, on the work you've done. Any comments? Sure.
Brother, are you leaving right away, or can you stay to the end? Are you leaving, or are you staying? The only reason I'm asking is because we can connect, after the panel, because we want to get your information. But if you have to leave, my card is on the back table. Just call or email me, and we can follow up with you directly.
Sounds good. Dix.
I'm Brother Francis from St. Benedict's. I'm a volunteer minister at the MSFD. And my question to the panel, especially to Deonte, is I meet a lot of the generation that you described. And my question is, can you give me some hints of how to relate to them so that my service there might help them better than I do now? No, St. Benedict de Moor. Yeah.
You want to be able to better relate to them?
Better relate to them, yes.
Younger folks.
Yes.
So the question was, how can he better relate to the young people from where he stands? And I would say the fact that you even want to relate to them and connect to them is the first start, because that's innate, so they can sense your heart. So regardless of any activity, I can't give you a prompt because I'm not you. But what I can say is, if you come out of the pureness of your heart, no judgment, and really with integrity and dignity, regardless of what your walk of life is, regardless of what your color is, they're going to take you in as if you were somebody that grew up in their area.
Thank you.
Again, I'm Hetty Keith, and I am a certified hypnotherapist. And I specialize in post-traumatic stress disorder. And I recently did a presentation workshop at our National Guild of Hypnotists Convention on post-traumatic stress in the Black community. And I used some of that because it's been an interest of mine, because all the violence that we see affects everybody, not just the people directly involved, but their families, neighbors, witnesses, everybody. All that gets programmed into our subconscious mind, and we react from that. So my question is, how can I be of assistance?
Well, just like the gentleman who spoke before, I think it would be wonderful if we could get your information, because we are looking for different methods for working with youth and families to address the types of trauma that they may be experiencing. So with the ReCast project, we'll be having a coalition that we'll be building, and then we'll also be looking to speak with different people to see what practices are available and how we might be able to connect community and family members to those services. So we'll definitely, we should connect as well.
Don't forget to use your post notes out there, folks. Please come on up.
Hi. First, I'd like to say how happy I am to be here today. And as a grandmother and a woman who's 65 years old, I want to say I'm real happy to see young warriors like yourself who are a integral part of the solution to some of the problems we have in our community. But I also want to say, as a single parent, that I really want to, the question I have is, how can we change the discussion about the matriarchal structure of the African American family to looking at the resilience of the situation? And that is the fact that when you have kids who are born to parents who do not marry, or who divorce, or who are widowed, or whatever, and there's not a lot of support for co-parenting, you know, how can we turn the discussion to talking about co-parenting and how important that is? Because when I think about my single parent family and the fact that some of the issues that we're dealing with, I've never had to deal with those issues because of the fact that I had a good co-parenting situation, you know. And I look at the young people that I work with now, and they, you know, I work with teenagers. They have a kid, they're not encouraged to co-parent, they break up from whatever their situation is, they move on to the next person and the next person and the next person, and there's no encouragement for them to just simply get along with the person that they had this kid with. That's my question.
Okay.
And let me just one more thing.
Sure.
Shout out to Brother Keon. I listen to you every morning, 8:60 a.m.
It's good to be recognized. All right, we're going to comment.
I think it's an excellent point that you bring up. Sometimes when we talk about the breakdown between family life in our community, we spend so much time talking, and I'm guilty of it often sometimes as well, about the young men, that we neglect the impact that the presence of men in the community has on young women. When we look at the level of situations that are taking place in the community with regards to human trafficking, with regards to abuse, with regards to a lot of the situations that we're finding, the presence of men in the community has an impact on young women, positive or negative sometimes, that needs to be addressed. But to the point about co-parenting is critical. I think when you look at the dynamics, when many of us, the way that child support is done, when you look at how we kind of weaponize our relationship to our children in the home life, that has an effect on youth that in many respects we don't know how to measure or quantify, but it shows up in a lot of what we're talking about with regards to violence, self-abuse, and drug abuse, and some of the risky behavior that's simply done just to get attention. I think the work of the Fatherhood Initiative is critical, but I also believe that more can be done to really amend reconciliation between parents, because it's going to take that type of approach to restore community life, which is the #1 preventative measure. It doesn't mean folks going to have to be best friends, but, you know, I'm coming from a household myself where my father left when I was 5, and, you know, at a certain point when I was, you know, smelling myself and thought I was the man of the house, my mother had to call him back into the picture and say, get your son. And that's just how it is sometimes. And unfortunately, many of us can't have that conversation because, you know, we've gotten too much bad blood between each other.
Can I add to that? So one of the things that I'd like to add, oftentimes women, black women especially, get like the short end of the stick. You know, you guys are the single parents, and because of you being a single parent, there's all of these different issues with society, and there's this whole sometimes assumption of them being immoral or that sort of thing. But just as David talked about social media kind of changing things in the way youth interact with each other or their connection to society, in general, marriage is declining, you know, so it's not just in the African American community. In every single demographic in the United States, marriage is declining. And so there's this new kind of trend that's happening where families are having children, but the parents are not married. So that should cause us to interact and engage with those family systems or the individual parents differently. We have to start to rethink the way children are being brought up, and we cannot necessarily assume that there are going to be a husband and wife in the household. And we can't demonize the single moms of any race who may not have that partner. So it's just to start to rethink what's happening, because there's this national trend in the US for everyone where we're not getting married.
You next, man. Okay. Here you are, sir.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Judge Mike Hanrahan, Milwaukee County Circuit Court Judge. And so I'm kind of where you want to avoid people getting to me. And that's great, because I would appreciate that. But my question is, what are the strategies that you're thinking about? And I read through the short 4-pager, but what are the strategies that you're thinking about to engage the people who may be committing violence or be potentially likely to commit violence? How are you seeking to find, in a sense, those customers or those people, engage them and keep them engaged? Because it's not just going up to someone and say, hey, you just started a fight. Stop that. You've got to engage them, change their thinking cognitively. How do you engage them and keep them engaged? Because as a judge, we get to put someone on probation, and we do probation reviews, and I can come back and have them come back every 2 months or 3 months and say, how you doing here? Are you going to the anger management program? Are you doing this? If you don't do it, you might spend a weekend in jail. That might encourage you. Keep doing it. Get through the whole program. So I have a way to incentivize them because I can hang time over their head. But in your situation, you don't really, you've got to kind of use moral methods to engage them and keep them engaged. And so I'd like to hear a little bit more about your strategies on that.
That's a really good question. I'll address it from a macro, and we can give specific examples. So one, we've engaged that population in the planning process. So we've talked to people who've shot who've shot people and who have been shot. And everyone that we've talked to, in most cases, if it wasn't a self-defense situation, said if they had the opportunity to make that decision to not do the level of time that they had to do, if they could go back and do it differently, they would. And then they said, if we had these things in our lives or in place, or if these things were true in our lives, we would have been less likely to make that decision. And so the blueprint is informed by their engagement and by their voice. And that is a priority for our work, both from a youth perspective and the work that Brother Deonte has been doing, particularly with young people who have been repeat carjack offenders in the city, and trying to get a sense of what is happening and what is it that they want and need long term. Because to your point, and to what Sumaiyah said earlier, oftentimes, we engage them for a month or in a program for a day. It has to be consistent. So we're actually looking at a fellowship model, particularly for young people who the courts would consider no process, but they've been involved or passengers in maybe 5 to 10 stolen cars, but they haven't been processed. But all the red flags are there, but with some significant case management and engagement and connecting them to resources and supports over an extended period of time, they'll be less likely to be the shooter or the carjacker next time. And so that's a priority. And then I'll let Brother David talk about the neighborhood violence prevention work and how we're engaging that population directly.
The points that Reggie just made, the population that we're talking about that's already system involved, across the country there's some approaches that have been very effective in reducing violence, reducing re-injury, and reducing recidivism. So interfacing with the courts with group violence reduction initiatives, the call-in models that have been done in some other cities have been effective if the level of support that's there for the individual is present. Is oftentimes there's more stick than there is carrot, okay? So the community of support that has to be built up, the infrastructure that has to be put in place, the people that have to be brought to the table and pulled together to create an individualized plan for somebody is key. Also, we're moving away from, when we talk about case management, it always comes at a punitive lens. So if we can relate this to diversion on the front end and deferred prosecution, it can be very effective. We talk case management, but we're really talking about, nobody in this room wants a case manager. You want a life coach. You want someone who's going to be able to help you and not go away after you've met your court supervision. You want somebody who's going to be in the environment with you and help you in your reentry process. Because we call it reentry. They're coming home to the community, and then you finish the program and the person you came home to goes away. Well, what do you do? So group violence reduction is something that has already been attempted in Milwaukee. Again, I believe that community has to be at the table in genuine engagement. What we're currently doing and looking to bring to scale is the Cure Violence model, which involves people who were ex-offenders. So what can become a prevention program using ex-offenders now can get that person a level of support for themselves as well. When we see a lot of the people who become life coaches or case managers in these types of programs, those are people who have come out of the life, who have gone on to be to gain access to furthering their education, to furthering their employment. You got to have some measure of employment, but employment alone ain't going to do it. It has to deal with the trauma that they are re-triggered by constantly, all right? And just being in that environment does it. So it has to come with a level of counseling, but counseling that really addresses what's at the root. We talk about culturally competent. What we really should really address is cultural humility, which is respect for the culture of the community that you serve, and then having a culturally informed lens, because in a lot of the conversations about trauma, culture, and identity is not present. To the point that was brought up by Ms. Rose earlier, culture is a key part of this. It ain't gonna work without that. It doesn't work without the identity piece. So they have to be able to relate to the person, but it's more than just war stories about what I've been through. It's, yeah, I went through that, but now I'm on something else. And it can also be somebody who never went to prison, but just is in touch with a body of knowledge that is so rich that it kept them from going into that environment. And that's where many people can thrive in this space and doing this work. So we believe that the relationship with the courts is a key one in terms of identifying individuals, because also with law enforcement, when you look at the group violence reduction strategies, they know who's coming back into the community. They know who is hot and has a lot of things going on. And, you know, as a judge, we appreciate your sentiment because a lot of the low-level offenses could be handled on the front end if somebody would go to the individual and be like, look, you know they watching you, bruh. You know they waiting for you with that busted tail light and all of this. They'll bust you for the least infraction. Look, let me help you. Let me work with you. Where it's not something that's absent of court-informed or law enforcement informed, but it's not something that's punitive in a way that makes somebody not want to go altogether.
I think to add to that as well, I think it's twofold. So dignity in the courts as well. So sometimes, like I've seen young people or watched young people go through the process, and like that idea of like even being chained to the table, like even if you know process, you've been processed because it's like you already went through the process. So once you get out of that, like it's hard to regroup. But one of the things for us, like especially with the young people, so many times we be like, oh, they need a job, they need a job, they need a job. No, sometimes they really just need that life coach, that person that really just cares. And though this isn't really the work that we were designed to do as far as being on the ground, but we saw that there was a need that was necessary, and we chose to be that in addition to the work that the Running Rebels are doing, the Southwest Keys, all of these different organizations that are doing this work. But it's going to take a collective effort and a collaborative effort. So going in the houses of the young people, connecting with the young people, and not just being there for a month. Like it's still young people that call me now. Sherman Park happened. The uprising happened, and they were calling like, hey, the team okay? Like it really became a love. Like, hey, can you take me to school? Hey, I got a basketball game. Like that, just that nurturing aspect of it.
Okay, so there's a lot of things happening out here with the inner city youth serving agencies, like you just named, but we need to get more synergy between those groups. We have another question coming up.
Hi, my name is Edna Fenton-Roy, and I'm a restorative mediator by trade, and I'm a public facilitator. And what I do is I meet people where they are, and I value people. And I think if we start valuing each other, I think one lady stepped up, how can single women start helping each other? Well, one solution that I have found is that connect with your friends. You have children of the same age. Our kids get tired of wagging tongues, and pointing fingers. Sometimes we have so much in the news now. Choose an issue that's hit the news, a hot issue. Bring your friends together, talk about it. Have your kids there. Let them tell you how they would handle a situation like this. Talk about how to not get into situations like what you're hearing in the news. Someone has killed somebody. Learn your children, what motivates them, what is driving them. Another thing is to try to enhance mindsets. A person's mindset drives them. If you think it's okay to do this or to do that, you're going to do it, whether it's bad or good. Another thing, too, everybody makes decisions. Now, I wrote a program called The Turning Point, and I got it funded, and I was helping in the community. The Turning Point is have a program called the PTA, and this is just could be a double P. To pause when someone asks you something, you don't have to give a ready answer. Say, let me think on this. I was teaching a class, and I had one 17-year-old to come back. He said, you all listen to this lady. He said, because what she taught last week, I used it. I was able to walk away when someone asked me to do something that was not cool. They asked me to participate in getting rid of someone. And I told my friend, it was my cousin who called, and they wanted to participate with them. And I told them, no, I had to walk away. So this is what we are doing, is honoring people when we come to have sessions, allow for the opinions of others without being challenged. A lot of people keep quiet because if you say something that is not consistent with something somebody else says, then you're chewed up or spit out. So this process is called restorative conferencing. I do have a website. I wrote a book called Minimizing Conflict. I've been doing restorative mediation and facilitation for the Postal Service for about 20 years. And the reason I wrote the book, it was because people was coming to me, Edna, if you can resolve these disputes at the Postal Service, you can help others. So I'm about helping families now. But as for single people, get in touch with your friends, call them together. say, let's talk to our children at the dinner table. Have cookies and coffee or Kool-Aid or whatever you want to have, but get the children involved. Let them tell you what the kids in the community are doing. And then you talk about it without bringing Susie to the table and say, we want to talk to you about what you did. Well, you don't benefit from that. If you get Susie to the table and you talk about issues that maybe she has done, and you make it abstract, then she will listen without being embarrassed. People don't like being embarrassed. People need to be valued. They need to know that somebody cares. I did a workshop about 2 weeks ago, and I asked this young lady if she would, anybody, I had a volunteer, because when I did my workshop, I prepared for a group that was older. I wanted to show them the importance of their decision making and how their decisions impact not only them but the community and their families. So she stood and I asked her, if she would like to tell us who you are. Just tell us who you are today. But she told about what she wanted to do in life. I said, well, okay. I said, who do you belong to? And she looked at me. She said, I don't belong to anybody. I said, what do you mean? Don't you have parents? Don't you have a family? She said, no, I live in a group home. I said, well, now, let me tell you something. You do belong to somebody. I said, Miss Daniels, have you here today? You belong to Miss Daniels. Since I've gotten to meet you, you belong to me. And I want to be at your disposal. I want to help you. We have to start making ourselves accessible to people. My question is, I'm not interested in creating a new wheel. If I can just help somebody, and I have a lot of resources. I have a website. I'm going to leave my card here for you. If you want to take my website will tell you a whole lot about me and what I'm trying to do, but I'm only an individual. So I want to work with somebody. I don't want to work alone anymore. I'm too tired to do that. So I talked to this lady here I met this morning. She wants to know, how can I get involved? Older people have a lot of resources. We just want to work with somebody. I'm not interested in coming out starting my own thing at this age. I've already done that. So I just want to work with someone, and I have a lot of resources. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm sure they'll take advantage of the services that you're offering. Yes, sir.
Thank you. My name is Paul Jaczynski. I'm a member of the Wisconsin Bar Mass Incarceration Committee. And I see many of the goals that we've outlined parallel some of the things you've mentioned. For instance, I myself have objected and have challenged the Milwaukee County practice of shackling everyone who goes through intake court as interfering with the presumption of innocence. I've challenged racial profiling as well as felon disenfranchisement, which many do not know go back to the slave codes. That's where it comes from. Many of the crimes that we have that are felonies, in fact, were used to put down people of color. So some of the information that I see you talking about here, I'd like to plug into, I'd like to use, and perhaps we, the committee can help you and you can help us. So if you don't mind, Mr. Moore, I'd like to contact you. I'll contact you via email, and perhaps there's some information we can get.
Thank you very much. That's what I'm talking about, some synergy between agencies.
Good morning. My name is Larry Hoffman. I'm a retired elementary school teacher, a privileged white guy. I relate easily to elementary school kids, and they relate easily to me, and I enjoy that. Through baseball, through rap, through music, through art. But to their parents or guardians, I'm suspect. And my question is, how can I build confidence in them so that I can work with those kids?
Okay, we're going to respond to that.
So that's a really good question. But I think one of the, so many times we get caught up on the individual and their I, right? So you think that there's a distrust in you, or a distrust in what you stand for or how you're showing up. Sometimes when we show up, it's not a reflection of who we are, but a reflection of that individual's mindset of who we represent. So what you will represent, no knock on you as an individual, but what you represent is the education system. Like not a lot of people believe that teachers really invest in young people, that they really just did to collect a check. You represent a population of people that is perceived as with the young person and family, like these are the people that come to our neighborhoods to take us out of our kids. Like it's like beyond just you. So I will say that you continue to do the work that you're doing, and if it's truly genuine, they'll be able to sense, and it will be a process to get there, because we didn't get here overnight. We got here through a process of compromising who we were, our humility, our dignity and integrity, and all of those different things going into that space. So that's probably what it is, like that lens is what is being seen through, but understand that they're listening, even if they seem as if they're if there's a confrontation or a confrontation. They're listening, so just stay consistent, because the moment that you really feel like you're not listening to me, you've given up, is the moment that they're gonna be like, man, see, I told you you're just like the rest of them. So just stay consistent.
Thank you for those comments, Mr. Dent. 2 more questions before we wrap up. We want to finish on time.
Hi, I'm Tracy Dent. I've written a restorative justice program that's dealing with community conferencing. One of the questions I wanted to know is, are you working with the local districts for the DAs for like first-time offenders to just, help detour them away? Because there's a lot of first-time offenders, but not all of them are taking advantage of this community conferencing. And I think that would be something great for Office of Violence and Prevention to be part of. And just wanted to let you know that I do want to connect with you guys, because I am working on, with District Attorney John Chisholm, 2 restorative justice programs. One dealing with the homeless, and another one dealing with what is it? No. I'm talking about with the prison system. I just say the prison system. And the goal is to have it launched by the 1st of 2018, January of 2018. So I wanted to bring you guys on board so we can connect. Huh? Oh, and also I've written a resolution for October to be Anti-Bullying Awareness Month here in Milwaukee County. And then on October 25th, it's going to be National Unity Day, and asking people to wear orange to speak out against bullying. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dent. More agencies coming together. 2 more comments. 1 more, Mr. Chairman.
Good morning, gentlemen. I'm going to try to make this brief. Name is Terman Spencer. It's probably a 2-part question. The first question is, do you guys have a database, for example, for all the folks that offered to help with resources collected in your office? And the question is, if you do not, would you collect one and start one? And the second part of the question is, after establishing that, can you make it so that we can call and get those resources from you? I would greatly appreciate it. I'm sure many others would too. Thank you, folks, for being here. Thank you.
All right, good comment. Last but not least, this gentleman.
Hi, I'm a certified school teacher through Milwaukee Public Schools, DPI. Taught for over 13 years in the classroom. And during my classes at UWM, one of my professors brought up who benefits from failing schools. So it made me believe, from my experiences and what I see in MPS, that public school systems are designed to fail a certain number of students. So the brother in the black suit, you said that the powers that be conduct all these studies, but we never see them. So I'm wondering, do you think that all of these studies are being done to make sure that their plans are working? And how can we be successful and maybe fly under the radar? You know what I'm saying? Because there's a lot of successful black people out here, but they're not publicized. And I can see it as I ride through the neighborhoods and I see, like, you might see a block with boarded up houses, but then you got this one immaculate, well-kept house in the middle of the block. Go 2 more houses, they're raggedy, trash outside, and then you got another one with both vacant lots on both sides. So to me, that says a lot about the success of the people in the community by looking at their property. So I would like to know, do you think these studies are just designed to make sure things are going as planned?
Comments? I guess we'll go to the black suit.
If I was building a hotel, I would only build it if I knew I would have occupancy. And the same goes for prisons. And I believe that in our community we have a knowledge gap in terms of information, that information is absolutely power, and that when we are denied that information, someone else renders us powerless to stop that. However, we have a lot of people, as you described yourself, in the school system and in different institutions. And for those of us in those institutions, our job is to be watchmen and watchwomen on the wall to let our people know a sword is coming. And that's why comfort should never be the goal of those of us in the professional fields. It should be that we are there on behalf of informing the community. When you look at many of the leaders, and I use that with air quotes sometimes, and when you look at those of us who are in positions, it is our job to teach, to educate, and to inform our community about policy, about these documents that exist, about the research that's been done. I mean, one of my favorite ones to quote is the 2010 study that was done by UWM that talked about employment, but there was another study that talked about how much money actually goes through our community, even in the poorest zip code. And the money that goes in our community, the wealth that we have, is very much related to those quality of life essentials, which is home ownership. When you look at the areas that have the highest levels of gun violence in the city, they are also the areas which have the lowest levels of home ownership. So when you look at a book like Evicted, now everybody across the country is talking about Milwaukee and folks getting evicted. But, you know, some of us, we hear this stuff and it's like, man, you could have paid me to do that. You can tell me something I don't know. But if you look at the map of shootings in our city and overlay it with housing instability, it's the same. And check this out. When you look at the map of low educational attainment and housing instability and gun violence, it's the same. The school, the neighborhood, the ability to own. We talk about a housing crisis. We got to talk about, you know, the banking institutions that took people's houses, you know, or folks that, you know, could pay the mortgage but couldn't pay the taxes and lost the house. So we have to have some very hard conversations in Milwaukee about what real justice looks like. I don't even like saying equity because that's kind of weak. Justice means somebody got to give up something because somebody has lost for too long at the expense of another people's success. So yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. As we're concluding, again, let's give the panel a big hand. But one other thing I want to talk about, this was given to me, another person who's been here a lot, local politician, our Gwen Moore, not local, actually, for the state, but she's passing a bill to reintroduce the bill to prevent violence. Just want to make one comment about it. According to data analyzed by the Washington Post, 2016, police shot and killed 963 people in our country. Look a little harder. Now, those are the ones that get killed. There were 1,134 deaths from both fatal shooting and others that were in police custody. It's across the board. So let's support Gwen Moore when this bill comes back up, or encourage our other politicians to also join in. But again, thank you all for coming out. Someone mentioned earlier about where do we get information. This is where you get a lot of your information from, coming to community brainstorming. And we are going to continue to be an avenue to share to the community things that are happening that affect you greatly. But again, the panel, great job. I'll turn it right over now to our judge to close us out.
If you have post-its, leave them on the table.
Okay. Well, we've come to the end of another educational session, and we've been given some valuable knowledge. I really want to thank these presenters. We've been very much enlightened today, and I have made abundant notes. So memory fades, but notes remain. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. You've done another fine job. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us. We'll be here again the 4th Saturday in September. Do join us. Also look on the website, and you will get a notice of what our topic will be.
An MCM production.